I think there was a little bit of a trend of like startups and companies and projects pushing the boundaries to benefit by speed, to make things faster. And this is on all different levels. My belief and my hope is like that we're getting more down to this, like concentrating on really for professionals in a way.
Hello, welcome to the DevTools-fm podcast. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey everyone, we're really excited to be joined today by Thomas Paul Mann. Thomas is the CEO and co-founder of Raycast. Raycast is a tool for Mac. You can kind of think of it like the Spotlight, except supercharged. And Thomas, I'll give you an opportunity to do a better elevator pitch than that. But before we get into that, would you like to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, yeah. I mean, first of all, thanks for having me listening to devtools.fm quite regularly. So really pumped to be here. And yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm a developer by heart, turned into a founder and CEO lately and running Raycast. Yeah, you describe Raycast how we describe it often with people who are like familiar with the Mac ecosystem. And we describe it often as a spotlight on steroids. So we cover all the basics like launching applications and searching files and all the local bits. But yeah, we put a layer on top of that and making it possible to extend Raycast in any way you want. So we have a store where you can search what other people have built. So there are extensions, for example, to connect to GitHub, to check your open pull requests or create pull requests and stay on top of your issues. You can check other tools like Linear and Figma, or also have more fun things like searching your GIFs that you maybe want to leave in a pull request review. And this is like the exciting bit I think about for developers in general, and which I'm really happy to talk about in this session as well, is we have an API which basically allows you to build whatever you really want and make it very easy to extend Raycast to the way you want to have it, but also keeping it consistent with all the other extensions and the user behaviors we have. So it keeps being like what we often describe it as a general productivity tool for developers, but also we have designers and other people who basically just work on a computer and make them more efficient.
So why did you build it? Like there is Spotlight, that's something that comes with every computer. And then there's Alfred, which probably before Raycast, almost everybody had installed. So why build Raycast?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the honest truth is that basically me and my co-founder got frustrated with software and how it is to use. And don't get me wrong, I mean, software became quite incredible and quite good over the years, but a trend that we saw, it became more of a clicky thing. So you have to mouse click everything and navigate around. And we as developers like keyboard shortcuts to be faster, to do those kind of stuff. And we felt like we were missing out on the new apps a little bit. And that was what inspired Raycast, like really thinking about what we as developers know, how can we bring that to the next level and allow people in a way to use their existing apps also more efficient, right? So, I mean, we all rely on apps every day to do our work and you can't really replace them. But we thought about what is it if we put a new layer on top of that to make it more efficient to use with the paradigms we know, right? Like in your IDE, you have in VS Code, you have a command palette and then you search for stuff and you execute that. And in Raycast, it's very similar. It's just global. So you open it globally and you can launch an app as an easy task. But nowadays you can do full workflows. For example, I'm using a lot to create issues in Linear and assign it to my teammates, or staying on top of my Linear issues as well, just being like more flexible. And this was really like the culprit of like what we felt. There isn't like a tool which really works for professionals who want to basically shape off this microseconds of every workflow. So this is what inspired really us to build Raycast in the first place. And then, yeah, we started that 2.5 years now ago and keep going with that. And I think there is still a lot to explore, but this is really like where we felt there is a need for a tool like that and also a modern take on it, right? So if we look at Raycast, we wanted to have a beautiful tool. I mean, both co-founders are developers, but we're very keen about design because, I mean, I use my Mac too many hours a day, and the least that I can enjoy there is having like nice pixels in front of me, right? So we wanted to make it a pretty tool, a very functional tool, and speeding up workflows for us and everybody else as well.
Yeah, the way it's a layer on top of just everything is so cool. Like the first feature that I really liked was the reminders integration. It's just like having this global command palette where you can like not really task switch is really powerful.
Yeah, yeah. This is a great example. A lot of the times when I see my workflows before Raycast, it was I had a lot of context switching, right? Even for little things like, hey, remind me about that later. You need to open usually a new app, do that, and losing the context, and that's really annoying if you're in this flow state of programming or other things you just want to concentrate on. So this is like I think where the global mechanism really shines. It's like no matter where you are on your Mac, in which app, you just press our global hotkey and then you write into Raycast and can do all of the things. And yeah, the reminders one is one of our earliest extensions. And with a lot of those things, this came actually out of feedback. I remember the reminders one was just one of our first users, and he said, "Hey, I'm a heavy reminders user, and it would be just great to have an extension with it." And well, we just built it. And first, I think we had just creating reminders because this was kind of like the workflow you usually want to do. But then later, we just evolved in that you also can see your reminders, change them, and basically have your own full reminders that are backed by Apple reminders, so they're synchronized and everything.
So how do you just, I guess maybe from a technical perspective, just out of my own curiosity, how do you sort of give people the ability to generate their own extensions and also have this like really fast, really performant and very like native experience? Is like just like you have to provide like a little JSON object or something that like gives you the shape of what information will come back, or like what does that sort of look like, the process of developing an extension?
Yeah. As with a lot of the stuff, when you work on something, it evolves. So the first and foremost thing we wanted to start was making Raycast really fast. This was like a core promise, right? If you try to make something faster than others, you kind of need to double down on that. So that means we want to have the best tech stack that supports that, and also being very close to the native things, right? Like things that Andrew asked with reminders, they're like deeply integrated in the Apple ecosystem. So we wanted to support that as well, and wanted to make Raycast feel like a native app that is just like part of the system, and it's just this add-on you get, and then you have the superpowers to do more. So early on, we decided to build a native application. So the entire application is written in Swift, which is basically as close as you can get to the Apple platform. And that allows us to integrate with native frameworks that Apple has, for example, to access reminders. But it also comes with as a great deal of speed, right? So we have everything to make it fast there. And it also comes with this native feeling, like in the UI. So the UI feels and looks like Apple because it's built on their primitives. And what you see in Raycast is actually, we, funny enough, don't use that much of the core components that Apple gives us because we feel like they sometimes a little bit dated and funny enough also not that keyboard accessible. So we build pretty much everything ourselves on top of that and have our own UI components that adding up there. And initially we built all the extensions natively. So everything was built in Swift. We shipped that. We worked with our users what they want. They asked us for something. And then we built it. And as I mentioned, a lot of those things came out of our own needs. So we use linear as issue tracker. So at some point I decided, hey, I want to use that in Raycast. So I built a few commands and extensions for that. And then we made it public. People used it. But you can only go so far with it, right? So we know there are too many tools. We can't build all the stuff ourselves. And early on, we already had a plan to make it a kind of a platform where people can build their own stuff and share it with others and really end to end, so that other people can explore it who might not be a developer but still can use it, and wanted to make it a first class experience. So then the journey began to build an API, and our API is quite special because it's not a web API, right? So you don't make a network request to do something. So it's an API that works on your desktop. So it's a more like of a framework in a way that people can use. And if you distill it even more down, I think the closest is like a component system. So what we provide you is a component system with our lists and forms and other UI components that make up Raycast. So they use native features, but the extensions are written in React. So we went down the rabbit hole of building our own React renderer. So for the ones who don't know, so React is pretty flexible in a way. So you can have the whole React runtime, and one use case is React DOM that everybody of us knows for the websites, and then React Native to render something on iOS and Android. But you can spit out whatever you want. So you can spit out text, and I think there is a renderer for terminal to build React apps that make terminal apps. And we decided like we want to do that for Raycast. And this was a little bit of a journey. Like you don't end up there immediately, right? So first we built something which was more just in what you described. You have a JSON thing and you give it to the app and we render a list. But then you become quickly seeing the bottlenecks of that. So what is if you want to make an update to it? What if you have a following screen depending on it? What if you want to do something like an optimistic update or some caching? And all of that becomes very frickly, and you're ending up building your own UI framework. And then we went back and was like, said, well, there is a UI framework that basically everybody knows, or at least a lot of people can learn about, which is React. So then we basically built our own React renderer, which then communicates with the app and essentially renders native components. So in a nutshell, it's a little bit like a lightweight React Native, very tailored to our use case, not so generic to allow people to build something consistent, but super flexible due to that you can use React and it runs a node. So you can pull in whatever NPM package you want and it usually just works.
That's awesome. That's really awesome.
Yeah, the DX for that is super cool. Like just seeing React code is like is mind blowing. That it's so awesome that React is so flexible in that way, to where it's like this universal UI language, and it doesn't really matter where you're rendering that UI.
Yeah, this is what makes it so cool. And I think there is from Dan this cool blog post, React seeing it as a UI runtime, which if you read this blog post just changes how you think about it, right? It's then just like this is literally like a UI runtime, and what you do with it is up to you, which was really helpful for us. And yeah, this is the thing which we enjoy the most. Like we wanted to, one of our early goals was to build a great developer experience, like really something that people admire and love. And it turns out it's really hard to do that yourself without relying on the existing ecosystem, right? And I mean, maybe people can pull it off to make something better than the existing stuff, but there is like something that is not to undervalue is like familiarity. If you know something and you can do that again, that's the best developer experience you can get, because you know it, you don't need to learn something new, you're productive from day one, you know your utilities that you pull in, and all of the benefits that come with it was one thing that we were seeing like as a huge opportunity, like just using what people use. And well, if people don't use React, there's like a billion pages teaching it to you, right? So you can basically work with the community together instead of like trying to really reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a clever use of React Render. I was just like clicking through the API examples, and yeah, it's just really fascinating how seamless it is. So if you're reaching down and you're like trying to do something with the system, maybe you're trying to come up with an arbitrary example, trying to control some other program on your Mac, do you provide interfaces for all of those sorts of things directly from your API, or is that something that you just like, hey, use the native APIs for whatever this is? Because I mean, I'm assuming it's running JavaScript core, and maybe you have some access to lower level things through that.
Yeah. So we don't run JavaScript core. We actually run Node.js, which was another crucial decision. So
Interesting.
we started also with JavaScript core, and basically to make the runtime very isolated and building up the features we need. But then is similar, right? So there is an existing ecosystem out there, and we had this alpha phase of the API. And a lot of people say like, hey, I just want to use this NPM package. Why can I not use it, right? And so you're running all in this friction, which is really hard to explain. And you can write pages of documentation why it is like that. But, well, a developer doesn't really have time, right? And you just want to build something and don't want to bother with all the rest. So we basically switched then from the early version of JavaScript core to Node.js to bring in also the whole NPM ecosystem. And it still has a few limitations. So you can't have dependencies that rely on React DOM because we don't have any HTML or CSS involved. But you can have everything else that you can think of Node. So things like Node fetch and stuff like that works out of the box. And that's pretty cool. And then for the native APIs, what we do is we exposing them to the runtime with Raycast. So you have, for example, APIs to copy something to the clipboard or to paste something where your current cursor is. So having these deep integrations, which comes then out of the box with the Raycast API that you can use. And then often also these extensions just make heavy use of existing NPM libraries to connect to third-party services, talking to APIs with OctoKit to GitHub and those kind of stuff, which is like all the benefits you're getting when you're building on top of an existing ecosystem. And how you can control on the Mac different applications is often via AppleScript. At least this works pretty nicely on native apps, but also a bunch of other apps support that. So it helps you, for example, on Spotify to skip to the next track and play pause and those kind of things, which is super handy. And this is then basically just done by running AppleScript in a shell environment, essentially.
It's really cool.
So Raycast is like this kind of like global like command K menu. Do you have any plans to like make it context aware? Like it'd be cool if I was like in my terminal and I hit Raycast, I got like maybe a different set of options than if I were in another app.
Yeah, good question. This is certainly something which we had initially thoughts of and haven't fully went down with it because we first wanted to nail a little bit the API and exposing that and keeping it lightweight. But contextual awareness, I think, is huge, right? So I think there are certain things which fit into this kind of stuff, like the app you use at the moment, the time of your work, even maybe the services that are running somehow, and making predictions. I mean, it's all about, with those kind of things, to make it useful and predictable, because in Raycast people develop a lot of muscle memory, right? So I use almost blind now Raycast. I know if I open Raycast and type 2 letters, I get exactly this result because of our ranking. And so you need to balance that with like context awareness, which oftentimes, if it isn't implemented well, becomes very unreliable because you lose trust. It's like this you need to build trust with it almost, right? You want to have good recommendations, and if they're hitting good, that's well. But if there are 2 or 3 off, you feel like you're losing trust with it. At least I had this experience with things like GitHub Copilot, I think, is a good one, right? So at the beginning, it's like, oh, wow, this functions really well. But then when you really code quickly and then realize, well, this is not what I want, it becomes a little bit of less trustworthy in a way. So you want to find a good balance. So this is something which we probably want to explore. It pops up in our community from time to time. And I think the nice thing there is like you can make things even faster, right? And then this is what is in our mind always. What's the next stage? How can we make it faster? That you need less interactions to get where you want to be. So this is certainly something interesting. We don't have concrete plans on that in a way, but it's something very often also where things like that getting explored internally. We have like a concept where every Friday we hack on something and then people pick up certain stuff and experimenting with it, and then one thing leads to another, and then there might be projects coming out of that.
Yeah, I did see your hack day listed on your Teams page. That's pretty cool. So what sort of inspired taking that on? Like, where'd that come from?
Yeah, so I think all the way going back, like I worked up to 3 years at Facebook, and they have this culture of hackathons, right? So I think in London they had it every quarter, hacking on something. Me and my co-founder worked there at the same team and really took this opportunity always to hack on something that we feel good about. Oftentimes, funny enough, it were tools that we wanted to build for ourselves just to make us more productive. So you can see a theme here. And then like in Raycast, when we started that, a lot of the early features just came out of the team when they had their own use case and wanted to build that. I think the first one was clipboard history. I just hacked that because I wanted to have a clipboard history in the tool. It felt so natural. And then script commands, which is another way to extend Raycast, came out of a hackathon. We did this side project, ray.so, which we came out of a hackathon, which is a page where you can highlight code blocks and generate an image that you can share then on Twitter. We did a ton of other things, and usually this was always problems for ourselves when we solved them. So it felt quite natural, like we were kind of doing it and we really liked what came out of it, but it didn't really have a proper format. And then we wanted to formalize that, and so we put it in what we call Ray Day, which is basically now every Friday. So every Friday in the morning we post in Slack who hacks on what, and then people come up with their ideas, and it's entirely up to them what they want to spend the day on. So it can be addressing feedback, fixing bugs, can go pretty wild on like doing a proof of concept on something, building features, whatever they want to do. And so we keep this, and there are a few things that came out of that which became really big. One of the things that I always like to tell is the calendar that we have. So we have this integration in Raycast which shows you your upcoming meeting, and then with one click you can join Zoom. This was a feature that we early on put it in because, well, when the world went remote, it was very often that you needed to jump in a Zoom meeting, and it was very annoying finding the Zoom link. And this Andrew comes back to being contextual aware. When you have a Zoom meeting coming up, you just open Raycast and you build at some point this muscle memory, just pressing return because you know there is something where you can join a Zoom meeting, and then you're jumping in the video conference call. And then during a Ray Day, one person said, hey, it would be cool to show the upcoming meeting in the menu bar, just like as a reminder of like, hey, you have 5 minutes left, wrap your thing up, go into the meeting. So Soren built that and then basically shipped it. And then people really loved that. It was like just a little hack he did. And people really loved that on Twitter. And then so the following Ray Days, he just improved it and added more and more functionality. And recently we shipped also then an API to basically put whatever you want in the menu bar. So it came all out of like this hackathon things and piling up just by like doing something that one person liked. And then we realized, hey, this is actually something which is really cool. And so now we integrated in our platform that, for example, you can see your unread messages or notifications of GitHub in the menu bar and other things. So just integrating that for others to explore this as well.
Yeah, that feature is super cool. That like you think Raycast is just like the command palette spotlight thing, and then you have these menu bar items. That's like awesome. Like it lowers the bar to entry to make an app that lives in your menu bar by like exponentially. Like I would have no clue how to start doing that on my own, but building a Raycast extension with React, like that comes natural to me as a front end developer. Are there any other like parts of the Mac that like you think Raycast extensions could eventually extend to?
Yeah. I mean, generally we have way too many ideas what to do with Raycast. I think it's one of our problems where it evolves just further and further. But yeah, I think like the Mac is interesting, right? So I think there are like a lot of productivity tools who use the Mac in a creative way. And I think menu bars is one of those, right? What people put in the menu bars. Not sure if that was predicted, but it certainly is really interesting what they have there from system information to other things. So it felt to us this is something which is really cool to get in there. And then there are like other pieces there which we might want to explore, like basically bringing more dashboard-like information to people. It's just something which, I mean, one thing is like you search something and opening and interacting with something, but oftentimes, and I think this is why menu bar applications are so trendy, is like you just don't need to do something, you just have the information immediately, right? So you're cutting away all the rest. And this is great for like staying on top of it, but it's also great for seeing information that you regularly check. And this is, I think, something which we want to double down in the future a little bit, like bringing more of this experience to the Mac and finding a good place for that to integrate there and being basically close to the native stuff.
That's really cool. So given that Raycast is such an extensible platform, what are some of the favorite things that you've seen the community build with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's obviously a ton of stuff by now. It was picked up really well. Just top of mind, I think one thing which I certainly can't live without anymore is like just the GIF search. It's just great, like searching Giphy and Tenor and all the others with like a global keyboard hotkey. So I press Option G and then I just have a grid in front of me with all the GIFs, and it remembers my recent ones and my favorites, so I can just copy them and pasting them in Slack or wherever I am at the moment, which is great. So this one is huge, and Joe, the community member, also does a great job. Whenever I think there is a new API release, an hour later is a pull request to basically update his extension. By the way, all of the extensions are open source, so everybody can contribute there and make their own stuff and getting inspired by others. I think one of the most funniest one is like, and this is where you see like how people can stretch a system, like with all of this APIs and you're putting something out, and tooling in general, I think like you're putting something out that people can build something with it, and you don't really have an idea what they're going to build. And this is the fun and the interesting bit, which is I always love that about this kind of tooling. This is why I'm so passionate about it. You put something out that people can use to build their own stuff, and well, it turns out somebody integrated Snake in Raycast, so you can go to the store and add a Snake extension, and well, it's probably borderline of being productive, but it just like tells you a little bit like how much you can bend the system. And he renders the Snake play field or the game field in in like Markdown. And this is again like something which like, well, you need to be quite creative to do those kind of stuff, right? But this is like what is exceptional working with developers. And so our API is constrained because we give you this component system where you can't break out, but you would be surprised on like what people come up with to work around that. And I think the Snake one just like is a really fun one to see, like somebody got really creative there and built something that nobody from us expected, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, the common theme on our podcast of constraints breed creativity, and this Snake extension is very creative. It's also fun. Like, I was going through the store yesterday, and you can see people take like your ideas and go, "Oh, I'm gonna make a better version of that." Like with the Spotify one, you made like a Spotify controls one, and then a community member comes along and makes one that's like way better and has like menu bar integration and all that. So yeah, fun to see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like this remix character, right? So people getting spoiled by something. Sometimes they're picking it up, bringing it to a different service, which is also the cool thing about open source. So people see there and sometimes contribute or come up with ideas, adding this and that, and basically helping evolve the whole platform and ecosystem, which is really exciting.
This is really a category of tooling that I love a lot, and I think breeds a lot of loyalty. So we've talked about several tools in this space since we've been doing the podcast. So I think back to like Obsidian. So Obsidian is note-taking tool, mostly open source. The plugin ecosystem is really rich and generates a lot of loyalty. And then, true of so many other tools in this category, something that can be a challenge in these categories is like building loyalty is easier when people can edit it, but then like trying to find a way to monetize the tool can be a challenge. So just looking through your site, I know that y'all have started approaching like a Teams feature and like doing some organizational productivity utilities and stuff. Can you talk a little bit more about like what your idea or how do you approach monetization when you have such like an open, editable, collaborative tool? Like how do you layer monetization on top of that without it being constricting to that original loyal base?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good question. So I think the theme you're describing, I feel like is like a personal tool, right? I think personal tools are capable to generate loyalty because it's much more than something you do use because you may be told to use it. It's your own choice, and oftentimes it gets attached to you very closely. Like with Obsidian, you're putting in your notes, so it's at some point half of your life is probably in there, right? So you're really personal attached. With something like Raycast, we see a great loyalty because it is like at the center of your actions. So people really go basically through Raycast so often a day that it becomes unavoidable to use it and becomes basically ubiquitous for them and are really closely attached to those kind of stuff. And yeah, so our plan for monetization shifting into that is like Raycast for Teams. So while we think about productivity as a very personal problem in a way, so if I have a problem for me and I can solve that for myself in a creative way, that fits me and might not fit everybody else, right? So this is just everybody else has a different stack and requirements and styles. But if you think about a team, it's different. In a team, you have the same setup, you use the same tools, you have the same things you work on. So in a team, it becomes more of like a collaborative problem where if one person solves this problem for themselves, there's a really high chance that other people can benefit of that as well. And this is what we want to make Raycast into, right? So really like a collaborative tool for teams to make themselves more productive and leveraging basically what we built, like the flexibility and the great foundation to build on top of that and making their work for like building internal tooling much faster and bringing it much closer to them so they can solve their own problems, right? I think there's a lot of tooling out there where you can solve problems and it makes it easier to build certain things for others. But there isn't that much which you really like yourself using a lot and making that for your own team. And this is where we want to go down with Raycast for Teams, being really this tool that teams fall in love with because they see, hey, it's so easy to extend it and tailor it to our setup and building those things and integrating with the platform. And then what's interesting is it also benefits everybody that is a new joiner in a company or in a team Because if you have a great foundation with a lot of like extensions and a lot of tooling, that they can just come in, and hopefully by this moment they have used Raycast already, so they're familiar with the concept. They just with one click become member of the organization, have just more functionality, and don't need to learn anything new. And I think that is also a great advantage. Just like this ramp up cost goes lower, onboarding becomes easier, they're familiar with it, coming back to the familiarity, and they hopefully can extend it themselves, and basically having this flywheel of people collaborating on their own productivity. And I mean, productivity is huge, right? So everybody want developers being more productive and saving time and all of this kind of stuff, right? So I think there's a really good chance that this becomes a huge thing, and this is what we want to go after.
Yeah, this is just it's a really interesting approach. I mean, because so we've talked to the Fig team, we've talked to the Warp team, and talking to you now, and y'all are all taking this sort of approach. It's like you start with building a tool for the individual user. It's like you make their life like better, like give them a tool that they want to use every day because it's like delightful and like helps them be more productive or whatever, solves this problem. And then for the monetization twist, it's like, now how do we scale this out to a team? How do we like make this useful in a broader context? And it's, I don't know, it's kind of a cool just to see this trend develop as like more and more dev tools companies like are becoming more established.
Yeah, definitely. I think what I like about this trend, it becomes much more focused on the user and closer to the user. Basically, coming all the way back to the beginning, right, where I said like, "Hey, how did I come up with Raycast?" Basically, we got frustrated with other apps because we felt like as pro users, we didn't get a love that we wanted to have. So I think with Fig and Warp, sorry, they're doing like a great job of like also doubling down on this pro users, right? So bringing in the next innovation on the terminal, and this is particular for pro users, right? And making there a few bets of like making this more accessible as well, and then layering on top then the shareability and the team features, which I'm really excited about. Of like getting more of closer to the user, the software, and then working with them oftentimes together to bring it into teams, right? Like the true bottoms-up motion of like getting it to people first, and then they will help you getting it into the organization. And this comes back to the loyalty. If you have a lot of people in the companies using the tool, they will figure out how they're using it internally and help you pushing that through and become basically a voice and helping you to also accelerate in the organizations, which is really cool. And it's like, it's funny, like I treat sometimes teams and organizations is a community in itself, right? So we're working with a community together to work on Raycast and making it more accessible and like reaching it wider network. But I mean, a company is a community, right? A community is something that has a shared interest, and a company has a shared interest on making money in one or the other way. And it's like-minded people often, right? And so if one person uses it there, it makes a ton of sense that probably other people will adopt it as well, because it's this community character that then can spark.
So Raycast is based a lot on plugins. When and how did you describe to grow that community? Like, how have you done it?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, early on, we kind of knew this has to be a platform. There's just too much stuff out there that you need to integrate with, and there are tools I never heard of, right? So I'm sometimes surprised what extensions we get. So it was kind of like a no-brainer to make it a platform. But then there's like a little bit almost like a chicken egg problem, right? Like you want to make a platform that is used by a lot, but then you don't really have like a lot of people using it. So you kind of need to push through. And what we really liked working at Facebook was we worked on a project called Spark AR, and this was like augmented reality. So they built what I oftentimes describe a Photoshop for augmented reality. So something that people can build it, and then you can build an augmented reality effect, and then you publish it, and others can use it on Instagram and so on and so forth. But really what resonated with me was this massive focus on community and give them the tool and making it creative. And then this was really what pushing it off, where people got so creative, and it catapulted this whole thing. So early on, we also saw like, hey, we want to make this a really collaborative environment. It's not like just us building this tool, is much more. It's like people know best what fits their productivity and makes them more productive. So I think when we launched Raycast, I can't remember fully, but either way, a little bit before that or afterward that, And when we made it publicly available, we created a community. And it's like kind of this embarrassing moments. It's like this, we have it in Slack. So it's a Slack workspace where you can join. And I remember the first thing was like, we were 5 people, team members back then. And then the other 5 people were just friends of us hanging out there. So it was just 10 people. And it's like, oh yeah, this is like a little bit embarrassing thing. But then like it really quickly grew. So now this is probably 1.5 years later, we like 6,000 people in this Slack channel, and they're just coming in there. So, and I think it is this kind of proof that people are very interested in of like seeing how other people work, what they can learn with it, how they can collaborate with others to make maybe others better. There's a lot of like helping. Initially, there was a ton, and still is a ton of feedback for us, like how we can make Raycast better. They're helping us debugging stuff, which is like great when you work with developers. They know the frustration if you have a bug which you can't wrap your head around, so they send you all the logs and so on and so forth. So this really has evolved into something which I would have not expected, but is now like so crucial to the entire team and the company, how we run it. So all of us are in the community. I just answered a few questions right before I jumped on the call with you. It's just like this part of work where there are people that you communicating for now 2 years, and one of our active community members comes next week to London, so I'm going to meet up with them. And it's just like this whole thing which is like so much more than just a software that you build, which is really, really interesting when you have this human connection and figuring basically out with 1,000 other people what and how to build it. And then we had a launch week and surprising them with some things and giving back. But yeah, community is a little bit a magical thing. Like I couldn't tell you exactly like this is the way how we pull it off, but I think it's this combination of starting early where it's just like scrappy and people feel really bought in, and then being part of it, right? So to this point, I answer a ton of messages. All team members are in there. We basically just a message away. So if you want to know something about Raycast, just message me there on Slack. And I think this brings this loyalty and also a little bit of a family vibe and like you in this together mode, which is really cool. And this helped us then shaping a bunch of projects that are harder. Like we used a community to shape the API, which helped us to figure out that React is the way to go for us because they gave us feedback on it. This helped us to build new features and getting early feedback. This helped us to shape what Raycast for Teams is now. So it's really like this organic mode that you're in where you have like more people around yourself that can amplify your voice essentially.
Yeah, community is a powerful thing. This podcast, I'd say, is a shining example of it. Me and Justin met through open source by him submitting pull requests to one of the projects I worked on. So like this whole thing wouldn't be happening without community. We like even have one of our podcast guests got hired by another one of our podcast guests because of the podcast. So it's cool to be a part of those things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is the fun thing with communities, right? You can't really predict what happens, but I'm certainly sure it's most of the times positive. And there might be some outliers where negative things happen, but the positive stuff outweigh everything else so much, which is so good about it.
I do feel like there's a certain quality to creative communities. So when you build a tool like Raycast, where people are excited about it, they have all these ideas, they're inspired, they want to come together and like make something. There's a certain energy and quality to those communities that I love. And in particular, this is one of the things that really got me involved in Obsidian in the early days, is because their community, their plugin community, is just so engaged. They really enjoy doing it, like, you know, and they work on all these cool, crazy things. And I think that broadly, you know, it's definitely, if you're building a creative tool that's out there to empower people and people are excited about, you should definitely make sure they have a space to meet and talk and collaborate and work on stuff, because it's a great way to make progress and building out, like you said, product direction and understanding some of like just underlying desires and getting all this extra cool stuff out in the world.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we went with Raycast through Y Combinator, the accelerator, and one of their slogan is like, talk to your users, which is funny because I feel like I'm talking nonstop to our users because they're just sitting in the same Slack that I use. So it's basically a little bit of a cheat as well, right? So you're surrounding yourself entirely with that, which is great. So a lot of our roadmap is just when you ask like in the room, like, what should we do? People observe different things because they work on different angles and they're basically sensitive to different inputs. And if things repeating itself, I don't know, 10 times the same feature request, somebody will notice it and then say, hey, we should do that, and putting on the roadmap, right? So it's a great way to like staying really connected to that and figuring out what is really important without losing the touch to your users as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So we usually ask everyone who comes on some forward-looking question. Sometimes it's about the future of the web. Sometimes it's about the future of computing. But I think Raycast is a really interesting example here. So the way that we interact with computers is slowly starting to change. If you could just like envision some other way of operating with a computer, like, what would that future look like to you?
Want to hear Thomas's answer? Well, the rest of the interview, as well as a bunch of bonus content, is only available to our Patreon subscribers. For just $5 a month, you get access to full-length, ad-free episodes. You'll be able to vote on future guests, and you get to join us in our Discord community. There, we'll be hosting an exclusive Q&A with Thomas to answer all your burning questions. Want to be even more involved? Join one of our higher tiers and become part of episode planning and help shape the episodes as they come out. We hope you join us. Be sure to like and follow the podcast. Thanks for listening.